My name is David Zoltan. I am the Fleet Admiral, also known as the CEO of Geek Bar Chicago, opening just a couple short months actually here in the city, and I was asked to have the immense privilege of introducing this incredible panel that's all about diversity. We believe very strongly in diversity for Geek Bar Chicago from both a geek perspective, in that we love to share our geekdom with everybody and anybody we possibly can, and also from an economic perspective, in that we are not viable as a business. We can't be a bar and grill out there and serving geek culture if we aren't inclusive of everybody that's out there that considers themselves a geek. And really there is only one thing that it takes to be a geek, and that, as John Scalzi once said, is calling yourself a geek. So it is wonderful that we have such an incredible community that even if you look around you right now, you see people from all walks of life and people who embrace everything that it means to be a geek, to be out there and enjoying all the things that can be offered right now in movies, television, books, and more. And we have some people who are deeply involved with that with us today. They're going to be talking to us about their perspectives on diversity. It is my pleasure to introduce them. First things first, Michi Trotter, who is a blogger with Geek Melange and a feminist thinker of incredible talent. Gail Simone, comics writer of Red Sonja and Batgirl. Marianne Mohanraj, who is the founder of the Speculative Literature Foundation. Mary Robinette Kowal, the Hugo Award-winning fantasy author. Just came from a red eye on Hawaii. I'm from Hawaii, I'm told, so, be jealous of her immense tan. Scott Snyder from DC Comics, who of course is the writer for Batman Zero Year. And Karlyn Meyer, who is a gamer extraordinaire and legal scholar. And finally, the person who's going to be running this panel, because he can do it way better than me, the founder of the Chicago Nerd Social Club and my dear friend, Jeff Smith.
Man, what a lineup. And then you end up with me at the end. So, probably should have planned that better. I kind of wanted to touch on a point that David had mentioned in his introduction about the economic vitality of this industry and of this, spectrum of fandom. And I think a lot of that has to do with diversity and viability that we've brought to the market by expanding our numbers, by increasing the amount of reach that we have in geek culture. But it's very easy for us to kind of get lost in the fact that we need to make our communities representative of the people that are part of the culture. A lot of people are taking part in geek culture, but they're not necessarily getting all the advantages of the geek community. And I think this panel is going to kind of address some of those things. But I kind of wanted to start the conversation off with why it actually does have real impact in our community. And I'm going to start a question to Gail, because I know Gail has to run out a little early. But I wanted to ask, can you think of a scenario where a lack of diversity directly impacted either a purchasing decision or the final end result of a product because there was just a sort of lack of viewpoint that was missing?
I think it's more of a situation where when I first started Women in Refrigerators website, there was a lack of diversity in that the female characters a lot of them were pretty much used as plot points for the male characters. And it was kind of like the industry saying, these characters don't really matter, they're not important, you don't exist, female readers don't exist. And I literally asked them, when I first got into the business, a few years after Women in Refrigerators, I asked an editor, at one of the top editor, what is the percentage of female readers? And he literally said, I don't know and I don't care, right to my face. So, it became clear at that point that we had a lack of diversity, not just in creative pool, but in our actual comic books at that time. And I think it impacted the industry by keeping it behind the times, for one thing. And we're just now catching up, and I think we have a lot of work to do. I don't think we've caught up to television for sure, for what we think is acceptable in a regular mainstream top 2 company comic book. So I think it's impacting in that way. In terms of it impacting my own personal projects and stuff, I really, there's always been people from the beginning that want to close the gates. They want to close the gates on my column, whether or not I even wrote it, whether or not I was a female. They want to, put these gates up all the time. And I just kind of had the attitude that I'm going to burn them down. And, I'm going to show you guys that automatically cutting out so much of your potential audience by not even acknowledging that they exist is a poor business plan.
Yeah, I was recently involved in a project with author Jim Hines, who had put out a call for guest bloggers on his site because he had been saying that it was extremely important to show how there is actually a diversity of people who love geeky things, who love science fiction fantasy, who love being a part of fandom. And instead of him as a straight white guy writing more about why diversity was important, he wanted to have people speak for themselves. So there was an anthology that was collected where it was a bunch of different writers, people who had never been published before to people who've been part of the industry, just writing about how fantasy and science fiction and the type of representation that we see or don't see had impacted them as fans. It was a very, very important project, and from when I would talk to people about it, when I said that there were people talking about things from what it's like to be someone who does not fit within the gender binary, looking for characters, or for someone who was a trans person looking for characters, or looking for people of color and finding not even that much representation or even poor representation, was something that was turning them off of a lot of fandoms that we really enjoy, but because they weren't seeing themselves, it was making them less likely to pick it up. Something that I had actually discovered when I was writing my own essay was that as much as I love my fandoms, I'm an Asian American woman. All of the characters that I've ever identified with were white women. The majority of them were white women. And when I looked at my own writing, I had written stories that were all about white people. There were not any characters, even when I was Mary Sueing myself into a piece of fan fiction, I was Mary Sueing myself in as a white girl, which was really sort of fascinating and a little horrifying to actually see when I was reading my own writing. So it's really, I try to make a more conscious decision when I'm looking at fiction to look for writers who are not, I'm not just defaulting to men writing hard science fiction. Or looking for books that are about characters who aren't just straight binary gender characters. One of the reasons I love Marianne Mohanraj's novella The Stars Change was because she said that she was writing inspired by events in Sri Lanka, and her characters were queer characters of color, and it made a wonderful, wonderful story.
I've got a young adult fantasy series I'm working on, and the second book in the series, I'm planning on the main character being a lesbian, and my agent doesn't want to sell it. I mean, he doesn't want to try to sell it because he says that unless it's an issue book about coming out-ish stories and being a lesbian and so on, that it's going to be a hard sell. Libraries won't want to pick it up, etc., and so on. It's really interesting to me that it's like it's not even making it to the editor, like it's stopping with the agent, right? Like it's certainly kind of discouraging when you're like, here I am. Right, I haven't even written the book yet, right? Like so, and it has a chilling effect, is I guess what I was gonna sort of say, right?
Yeah, I as we've mentioned, I've just come back from Hawaii. I was helping my in-laws pack up after living there for 45 years. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. But But on the flight back, you're scanning for movies, and they have these little thumbnails, and all of the films except for one, all of the offerings, the television, the films, all of them, the only pictures were of white people, with one exception, and that was Black Nativity, which if you haven't seen it, I watched it because I'm like, hello, it's a musical based on a play by Langston Hughes. How can you go wrong? It's fantastic, but it really was a very visual encapsulation of this thing that happens all the time, of this lack of representation. And in my own fiction, I write historical fantasy. It's like Jane Austen with magic. And in my first 2 books, it's all white casts all the time. And I made the excuse for myself that it was because I was doing a Jane Austen pastiche, and in small towns in Europe, and I was completely dead wrong. And all of my books after that, I've made certain that I am actually representing the historical diversity that was in Europe at the time, and also trying to work in not just the ethnic diversity, but also making sure that I'm including people who have different abilities and also are sitting someplace on the gender spectrum. And I'm very lucky. I think we're starting to see a sea change, because I went to my editor and said, so I have a trans character in the 4th book, and I can't actually use the word trans because 1817, it's not a word yet. But I want to talk about it. Do you think that that's okay? And she's like, I said, is it okay for me to talk about it, or are we worried about sales? And she said, anyone who doesn't want to buy the book because of that, fuck them.
For me personally, sometimes when I see a Black character in a book, it's kind of the same tired stereotype where it's like, oh, young guy from the hood, single mom, trying to do the best. So I guess my question is, and I want to start with Mary Ann, what are some tips for creators to help them create characters that are outside of their own experiences to kind of help bring along diversity in fiction?
Okay. So my day job is an English professor at UIC, and I teach creative writing and lit there. So I get this question a lot from my students. First of all, there's a book out there by Nisi Shaw and who co-wrote it?
Cynthia Ward.
Cynthia Ward, called Writing the Other. So if you're really interested in the topic, you can go get the book. And they give a bunch of strategies. The sort of short version, I think, I guess it depends on how lazy a writer you are. I'm a very lazy writer, right? And so, like, there are writers that go and do tons of research before they write anything, right? And I tend not to do that. I tend to go ahead and write using my imagination, my knowledge of the world, etc. And if I'm writing a character from a culture outside of mine, I'm probably going to get some things wrong, right? Because I'm going to be picking up on cultural assumptions, stereotypes, etc., so on, are going to make their way into my fiction. And then what I do before I publish it and embarrass myself in front of the world is I show it to people. I take my workshop drafts and I go and bug my friends, and I'm like, can you look at this? I had, when I was first writing, I was writing erotica, and I wrote a story with 2 gay men, and I'm not a gay man. So I took this story to a gay male friend of mine. I was like, what do you think? How did I do? And they're like, it's a little girly. So, and then you work on it, right? And so I guess that's my very shorthand version.
But one thing that I want to point out with you don't have to hold the microphone.
Yeah.
But one thing that I want to point out with you is that you're already very well versed in these things. So I don't know that other people can just dive into the fake it pool quite as quickly.
But like there are lots of stuff outside my experience, right? Like I am scared to write urban Black characters, for example, right? Because I grew up in a Sri Lankan community, and then in very white Polish Catholic New Britain, Connecticut, and then I lived in Utah for a while. I mean, I love living in the city now, but it's still like it's not. I'm not immersed, right? And I worry that I'm going to get things wrong, and I do get things wrong, and I just there's this phrase, fail better, like you're gonna fail. Like, part of it is like, accept that you're gonna get things wrong. You're gonna show it to someone and they're gonna be like, oh, you have a magical Negro in your story. And you're like, oh no, right? Or maybe you don't know what they're talking about and they explain it to you. So,
Do you want to down that way?
Yeah, you haven't talked yet.
And I definitely encourage, I mean, if you, let's say you're writing for another, let's say that you were a white person and you have a friend who is a black woman. For example, I have a writer friend who asked me, she said, I'm writing a woman of color and her hair is a very significant part of the story. And so she said, can I ask you some questions about your hair as a black woman? And that was a really scary thing for her to ask me. And, you know, I was, of course, happy to talk about it. Who doesn't want to talk about their hair? But you just kind of have that moment where you can say, you know, I'm reaching out. People, we're really, really happy when we're talked about, and we would love it if we were talked about well. So just really encourage, you know, I encourage you to kind of reach out to people that you know, and if you don't happen to know people in the demographic that you're writing about, maybe look into that too.
Yeah.
Learn how to listen.
So I just want to jump on one thing that you said, which was that her friend knew to ask about the hair, which means that she had already done 101 research.
Yeah.
When you are you're writing the other, do your 101 research with text that already exists.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the library. The reference librarian is your best friend. They are a superpower and use them. And then after you've done your 101 stuff, that's when you go to people and you ask the stuff you can't find in books. You get into the specifics of, like, because I had hair questions too, and there are things like, couldn't find the answer to, what does a white person's hair feel like to a black person? Yeah, it's that. Yeah. So stuff like that. Those are the things. I mean, other things too, but yes, more research.
I would also say, I mean, generally, I encourage any writer to write about anything, right? Like, I do think that's kind of your right as a writer. But you might ask yourself, like, why are you drawn to this culture if you have absolutely no friends or any experience of it, right? Like, there was someone in my writing group, she was, just a few weeks ago, she brought in, and she's a white woman in her 60s, lovely woman. She brought in this story that was set in Japan, all the characters were Japanese, and it centered around a tea ceremony. And it seemed to, I think, our whole workshop, like a very superficial, like the amount of knowledge that anyone might have about a Japanese tea ceremony, right? A very thin layer. And we sort of asked, like, why did you pick this story? What is it that attracts you to it? What about changing it so the protagonist is a white woman who's married a Japanese man, perhaps, and is there? Like, if she's really wedded to that material, like maybe finding a way in that is closer to her experience of it. So anyway, I mean, just kind of asking those questions, and because sometimes what attracts you is the stereotype, right? So.
Did anyone have another response? If not, I'm going to jump to kind of a segue into that. So that reminded me of a story that I had at work where someone legitimately asked me, do we have chicken at Thanksgiving? Like, in her mind, it was chicken and watermelon at Thanksgiving. And
we do have curry at Thanksgiving.
So do I sometimes.
Actually, our traditional Christmas dinner is shrimp curry.
Well, you know,
It's very
turkey.
It's very southern.
These types of situations come up, especially in geek culture when you're dealing with different power structures, and we talk about like privilege blindness, right? Where people in a position of privilege don't really understand or recognize that what they're doing might be offensive or rude in some respects. So it's very difficult to kind of like, and uncomfortable to kind of like break through that and say, hey, what you said was kind of offensive, while at the same time not putting that person on the defensive. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I kind of want to, I'm going to toss it to Scott.
Put up your dukes.
Our resident person of privilege at the moment.
I don't know what to say to that.
he's got a question.
I wanted to ask you.
I'll talk about Batman.
I wanted to ask, what is a good way for someone to kind of broach that subject without necessarily putting you on the defensive, just to have like a kind of an open, honest conversation? Because I think that's a lot of the walls to diversity, right? We have these kind of like things that we just don't talk about. And if people's feelings are hurt, we just don't talk about it. We just kind of silently harbor it. And I think part of bringing in a more inclusive diversity of communities is to kind of get those conversations out in the open.
Well, I think, cue the sad music.
Yeah.
The straight white guy. What I would say to that is like I definitely have like an extensive library of experience in being the person that has asked those terrible questions, not offensively like the way you're. I mean, I would not ask the question you started that question with, but as somebody who grew up in New York City, I think one of the things that is startling is that my best friends growing up in an urban environment, on the Lower East Side, my best friends are Black and Hispanics to this day. My best man at my wedding, Dante Williams, like, he's Black, and Lisa Camillo, who works for de Blasio, I'm really proud of her, she's Hispanic, and that was my community. I mean, that was just who I grew up with, and were my friends. So, I am definitely the guy who was that asshole that was like, wait, for Christmas, blah, 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 or, so I'm perfectly comfortable in that position. And, also being the dork that was like, I was really into hip hop growing up, and Dante would take me and buy me clothes. He's like, you look like a total fucking spaz. I'm not taking you to the Beastie Boys concert in Madison Square Garden, which I went to for like my 12th birthday, like looking like that. So like I was wearing like Carhartt, I look ridiculous. But the point is, like, I have been in that terrible position of being like, what is culturally sensitive? How do you sort of step over that to say, what I'm getting at is that I think at the end of the day, what you have to recognize is that these people are my friends and my best friends because you connect on a level that transcends any of those elements that are culturally specific. You love comics together, you love sports together, you love the same things in school. And when you're writing characters that are diverse, and I'm proud of the fact that, like, the characters that I've tried to write in the series or bring into the series, whether it's Batman or The Wake or whatever, are have been diverse. The point that the thing that you try and do is just write from the heart and say, the reason I'm friends with Dante is because we have a similar sensibility, and so this character is going to have a sensibility similar to mine. And if I get some of the cultural specifics wrong, after asking him and after talking to him about it in an embarrassing Mr. Magoo stumbling over myself way, which he's used to, and being like, you're a spaz still at 37 from when I took you to that Beastie Boys concert when we were 13, all of that stuff, like, that's okay, because the point is to create a character that basically you're not trying to make a token character, but you're doing because it feels, organically like it's important to the story for this character to have the kind of background that they have and feel, organically upset or in love with the things they're in love with. And, if you write in a way where I feel like your connection or your, sorry to ramble, but your impetus for writing that character is a connection on a level that is not, a tea ceremony, or is not because I like hip hop, but it's because this character is brutally upset by the way they've been treated in life, and you feel that yourself, even as a straight white male, about certain things, and you can connect to that. That's the impetus for writing that character. And then the other elements, you can be apologetically terrible and eventually apologize for if you screw up. But I feel like if it comes from the heart, and that's why you're writing the character the way they are, because you feel an emotional connection to what they went through or they're going through, everything else is forgivable. And it's okay to screw up, and I've certainly screwed up, but that's the reason. You don't write them to have a Black lesbian in The Wake or something like that. You write them because the pain they've experienced is similar in some way to the pain you've experienced, and their orientation or the things that they've gone through because of that are not necessarily the reason you're writing them. It just feels somehow like that element of their life plays into or is confluent with the other elements of that you're leaning into. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, but I am that foolish white dude. It's like, wait a minute, let me ask you something about this. You know.
I wanted to kick it over to Gail really quickly,
Okay.
and feel free to answer that question as well. But I'd also like to hear, like, how do you find the strength as the person that's been insulted to kind of go there and say, hey, look, what you said was wrong, and it hurt me. Maybe Gail doesn't have a problem with that.
I just sort of have the attitude that, I get hate mail every day, you guys. And I just have the attitude that there's going to be a certain percentage of people that are going to hate what I do, no matter what I do, just because I'm a strong female who has opinions. So, I don't let that bug me that much, and I certainly don't let it stop me doing from what I want to do. But the thing about getting diversity, I just want to talk about comics for a second, is that, you don't have a character in a comic just because they are blank. And I agree with Scott completely on that. But I also think that, we had a lot of years of mostly white characters, and decisions were made all these years, all along the way, to create these characters that were straight and white. And it wasn't just organically happening, that they were writing white characters. Those decisions were made. So when you create a new character or bring a new character in, the decision is made from when that character is creating. Are we going to create another straight white character, or are we going to create something different that we haven't seen 100 zillion times before? So conscious decisions are made, and it's kind of like sometimes they're not. I haven't come across this so much, but I know in the entertainment industry as a whole, there's roadblocks that people will block stuff right away because they're afraid of sales or whatever. But what I'm finding is most of those people are kind of behind the times. They're looking at old numbers. They're not really looking. Like, I had an editor literally standing at a convention in Artist Alley saying, I don't understand why girls don't read comics. And this was like a couple years ago. And I was sitting at the table. I had a huge long line. I looked down the aisle, and it was like female creators, females in line buying comics, people of all ethnicities and stuff. And I was just like, he's standing right there looking at it, and he's still denying it. So sometimes you just have to, like I said, burn the gates, because they're not seeing what's in front of their face.
Those are fake geek girls, though, right?
I think, and not to put Scott on the spotlight here, but one of the things that I think was really made a huge difference was when Scott came to our panel that we did, actually talking about the whole fake geek girl thing last year at Wizard World, and I thought it was a really good example of how you come into these conversations when you are a person with privilege. There were 6 of us up on the panel, and I'm pretty sure every single one of us, even though there were some people on the panel who weren't necessarily familiar with comics, Tippy, if Scott had been, hey, I'm in the back here, and I know that you're done with your panel, but I really have something that I want to contribute to the conversation. Don't think any of us would have said, no, we don't want to hear what you have to say. Would have been like, yes, please, definitely say something. But the way that he approached it was very deferential and very politely. We had just a note passed to us very quietly saying, hey, there's this person, Scott Snyder wants to, he would like to know if he could have time to ask one more question or send one more thing. And because it was look, I understand that this is your stage. I'm not going to tromp all over it just to show what an awesome guy I am and what an aware person I am. Instead it was, yes, you're aware, and yes, we were really glad that you contributed to the conversation. But the way that you did it was not framing it about you. You were framing it about the issue and about your observations and your experiences in the industry that were backing up what we were saying. Because as frustrating as it is for me as a woman of color, that if I want to speak about racism or if I want to speak about sexism, what I'm going to say is not going to carry as much as someone who is a man or someone who is white, because that's the way that privilege operates. Even though I'm saying the exact same things someone else is saying. So when someone who has privilege comes into a conversation and says, I want to back you up, or I have things to say that are the way that you're saying them, it's really important when they do it in a way that doesn't step on the toes or speak over people who are marginalized and whose voices may not carry quite so much.
Well, I think one of the things, thank you for saying that, but I mean, one of the things also that's so startling, I think, yes, you should totally apply that. not me, is that, you know, as somebody who grew up at a time where things weren't diverse and we would go to Penn Plaza and it was just a bunch of white dudes with long boxes selling Faust or Megazone 24 or whatever, it's so exciting to see the community become diverse. So, you know, you feel excited. Like, I feel wonderful that my son is coming to the con tomorrow. He's 7, and he feels no weirdness about saying, hey, I'm gonna bring Sophia, can I bring Sophia, you know, his friend who's 7, or, you know, Kinley, who's African-American girl. Like, he's excited about those things. When I was a kid, it was just, you know, you knew it was just sort of a weird, you know, it was just your own strange thing that you didn't want it to be that way. If there were girls when I was a kid at a con, that would have been wonderful. You know, those cons are horrible in that regard. And the thing that's strange, I think, sometimes for, you know, maybe people in my position, which again is super privileged and, you know, embarrassingly so, is that you're so happy to see it become diverse, and you really are excited for your kids, or to see it be something you wish it was, because your demographic, you know, the experience I had as a kid growing up with a diverse community was that you wish all your friends loved comics and would come from different communities, but it wasn't, it was very white. And now seeing it different, it's exciting. You know, I love signing things and seeing, I teach, you know, at Sarah Lawrence, and at least 60% of my students are women. And the class is very diverse in terms of, you know, ethnic backgrounds, demographic backgrounds. And that's wonderful to see. And then you bring in somebody like, if I brought James Tynan or someone like that, and he identifies as bisexual, and then suddenly he's getting hate mail, you forget all of a sudden that that exists, because you're so happy. And not like, you're so wonderful, you're so happy, but you've grown up in a place, you've been lucky enough to grow up in a place where you're okay with that sort of, I guess, that landscape that's, you know, that's plural and different. So I forget, and it's my bad. Like when I talked to Marguerite, you know, a young woman was my student and now is writing comics, when she says she gets threats all the time about being raped and stuff when she writes male characters and they think she's writing them softly. That's just out of my radar, you know, and you see it and you realize it's there, and it's there in a terrible big way. And it's important, I think, just to acknowledge that as progressive as it's become, or as happy as it makes someone like me who doesn't experience those things, and I'm like, wow, it's so diverse. The scary thing is, listening to you guys on the panel last year, or listening to Marguerite or James or other people that you try to bring in, and hear how horrifyingly scary it is still. And that's very depressing.
Speaking, I kind of want to move on, because I know we wanted to have some room for questions. But speaking of insane rape threats, I wanted to jump into the gaming space for a little bit, because I think that's going to be, or if it isn't already, like the next battle zone in terms of diversity and just human decency. So I kind of wanted to kick it to Karlyn for this, because I know you're a big gamer. When we have these like gaming communities, really you have these companies that are really just kind of creating these frameworks and just kind of letting the community run loose. So with that, you have no real control or order, and on top of that, you've got anonymity, which makes some of the techniques that we've used in other geek communities difficult to actually enact. So I just kind of wanted to get some of your experience in terms of, you know, how do we move the conversation forward, and how do we, for lack of a better word, punish those bad agents?
Yeah, that's it's something that is definitely just a toxic thing about the gaming community generally, but it's something that you see in a much larger way just on the internet, because you do have anonymity, you have the ability to make these immediate comments, you know, and without necessarily the thought of recourse. I think, kind of kicking it back to something that Gail said a little while ago, when you talk about the fact that there are decisions that are made behind doors that you don't necessarily get to cross, that say we're going to make these people white, we're going to make these people straight. These are things that we're doing. And going back to what Scott had said about how sometimes there are experiences that you are going to be completely unaware of, where people are getting rape threats, where just because you're a woman on the internet who dares to tweet something, people are going to say, that's it, that's her, she's done it. It's these things that sound really absurd unless you are part of them. Things that sound like, there's absolutely no way that people are actually just making these decisions, that people are actually doing these atrocious things, but they are every day. And so I think that there's always a moment where it's very staggering when you first become aware of the fact that, no, there are people that will just make rape threats simply because someone has a female avatar and she's on a multiplayer game. Like, that is something that just happens. And if you experience it, of course, you know. But if you don't, there's going to be a moment when someone tells you and that becomes true. And so it's always very difficult for people who are marginalized, who are trying to do something they love, they're trying to play a game, they're trying to talk to people about their interests, and they find that they're coming up against these barriers, and they're often greeted with violence, even if it is simply over the internet. It's really hard. And so I think when you are in a position where you are becoming aware of that for the first time because someone's telling you, because you're seeing it for the first time, and it doesn't affect you directly, just kind of recognizing that this is a time, my eyes are open, the world is disgusting, but I can be an ally now. And just kind of, it's difficult, I guess, if you're on one side of it to actually communicate this to people when you have so much anger and you're so frustrated that this is a world you live in that they don't actually have to see. But yeah, that's something I think that the gaming community is really kind of on the battleground of right now, of saying, we exist so much in these electronic spaces, and the ways that we are interacting with each other are really toxic and really terrible, and just kind of trying to move forward from that.
Yeah, please don't say, oh, it's just on the internet.
Yes.
Yeah. What I was going to say before actually, I think ties into this. In 2009, there was this race fail thing on the internet in the science fiction community. So if you're not familiar with it, you can look it up, Race Fail 09. And there are people who don't know about it. So,
No, so that just comes with a huge, oh dear God warning.
So there were various incidents in professional science fiction and social science fiction. The culmination of which was that John Scalzi, who is here at this con at some point this weekend, he runs the blog Whatever, which is quite popular. He gave and he's a white man, he gave his blog over to me as a platform to write a piece about race fail. John moderates with a very heavy hand, and one of the things that really struck me in that conversation, so I posted sort of a Racism 101 kind of introduction and talked about it in science fiction. Over the course of the next few days, there were over 1,000 comments, right? And I was trying to read and follow and respond to all of the questions that came up. And John was there with me in real time, moderating. And there were a few things I saw before he saw and that were racist attacks. That he then, he deleted and he banned them, and he was like, this is, I'm not going to allow this kind of conversation in my space, right? And there's some that I didn't even see. And it was really valuable. It provided a shield that made it possible for me to be there engaging with everyone else who was engaging in good faith, right? And people had questions, and people had honest confusion and whatever, and we debated things, and that was all fine. Like, it's not like everyone has to agree with me, but they were respectful, right? And we had this back and forth. And also my partner is white, and I have small children, and we have small children together, and he watched the kids for a couple days, basically, while I was dealing with this firestorm on the internet, right? And that is, I guess I wanted to call that out as another way, right? So this role that allies can have is incredibly important to making it possible for people of color, women, etc., to be part of these communities without being just exhausted by everything you have to deal with, right?
I wanted to jump on this as well, because something that Gail had said about the hate mail was that she said, it doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah.
And I really want to point that out, along with the just over the internet, because I also hate mail, although not, thank God, every day. And even though I can go, oh, you know, this is not going to have any impact on my actual life, you know. The fact is, the internet is another dimension that we spend a good portion of our lives in at this point.
Oh, it's real.
And
Yep.
even though I know that and I was able to laugh most of it off, I was still having mild stress reactions. You know, I still get the accelerated heart rate when I read these things. I still get the adrenaline surge, and then I'm like, Mary, this does not matter, and why are you reading it anyway? The moment you recognize it's hate mail, you trash file it, saving it just in case you need it later for legal action. I am not even kidding.
Yeah.
I wish that were a joke. But one thing that I wanted to kind of talk about is with that is when you're being an ally online and you see someone screwing up. This gets back to a question that Jeff had asked earlier, which is, you know, how can you approach them? And one way is to think about how you want to shape the narrative. Do you want to help them transform into an ally, or do you want to punish them? And someone that you punish, those are people that you're slamming the clubhouse door in, and they will never become allies. But if you can help them see what they've done wrong and help them understand it, and this is a very simple, low-key example. I was blogging the other day that I was looking for a CART transcriptionist because I wanted to see if I could make one of my online classes accessible and I said hearing impaired. And someone tweeted back at me and said, just so you know, hearing impaired is not favored in the deaf/hard of hearing community. And it was really great because it was presented in a way of, let me help you not screw up. It wasn't you're a terrible, terrible person. And sometimes you do need to tell people that they're being a terrible, terrible person because they are. But sometimes people are screwing up because they just don't know any better. And if you step into it as, let me see what happens if I offer the helpful branch first, a lot of times you'll get a reaction of, oh, thank you, and they will then go out and say, well, I have knowledge now. Let me spread the word about this.
And there's actually a little high around informing the next person.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
I
You know, it's not
Yeah.
favorable.
would say just
Don't ask about chicken.
an analogy an analogy my students like is that, you know, if you had a booger on your nose, you would want your friend to tell you, right?
Yeah. Right.
So think of sort of how I tend to think of this stuff, right? Like, please, if I have a booger on my nose, come and tell me. Let me take care of it as discreetly as possible.
I think like also the big difference too is someone tells you have a booger on your nose, don't go, oh my God, you're such a terrible person for telling me I have a booger on my nose. That is not going to make people all that inclined to helpfully educate you about the fact that you have a booger on your nose. So there's a lot of give and take where it's like sometimes, you know, depending on how tired and frazzled and frustrated someone is, a comment that maybe on a better day, a person may be like, okay, look, you got the booger on your nose, let me tell you why this is a bad idea, can come out as, geez, God, will you wipe your nose already? Everyone can see it there. And yes, it can be very off-putting, but it's also important to recognize that it comes when those kind of comments come from a place of long, simmering frustration where people who are marginalized are constantly told, you need to be patient, you need to be the nice person, you need to be really sweet, otherwise no one's going to want to listen to you. And there's a lot to be said for some people, sometimes being polite, sometimes being the nice, patient person can work. But when you're told that that's what you have to do, that no one will listen to you, when you're already coming from a place where you're marginalized and you don't have the same kind of societal power that someone of privilege has, it can be very, very frustrating. So it's also keep in mind that yes, your feelings are hurt, you might be embarrassed, but the person who's telling you that has probably been hurt, embarrassed, been tired, been frazzled, been threatened in a way that is so normalized that you can't possibly comprehend how much someone has to put up with before they finally have that last bit and they snap.
I want to give Mary just 60 seconds.
Oh, I was just going to say it's like the difference between, you know, seeing the booger and being the kindergarten teacher who has to deal with thousands of boogers.
This is just going to become a long-running metaphor now.
It's the kindergarten teacher lives in a classroom of snot machines, and they have to be nice to while they're disease carriers.
Okay, so this is going to be a quick lightning round, and then we're going to try to open the floor up for questions. So the Chicago Nerd Social Club recently adopted a harassment policy.
Yay.
And it's something that's becoming, you know, very popular. Now I feel terrible because I'm going to tell you the truth. Behind doors, from a position of privilege, I was kind of anti-harassment policy. Not specifically the wording behind the harassment policy, but just the fact that we needed it. Because in my mind, I said, well, we're not condoning this behavior just because we don't have it, and I have this kind of general thing against policies in general. And the board quickly reacted, and you know, we're a very collaborative board, so it's never, you know, my word goes. And I heard positions that I had never thought of because I'm 6'4" and 340 pounds, and find it difficult for me to put myself in that position. So with that being said, I kind of wanted to talk about policies and procedures and why they're important for geek spaces and making sure that people feel welcome. And it's not necessarily something that has to be done after something occurs, but before. And we can start with Mitchie.
So, full disclosure, I was the one who ended up writing the initial policy for CNSC, and one of the reasons I thought that we needed it was because it's proactive. We have a very awesome group of nerds in the Chicago area that we interact with on Facebook, in physical spaces. 9 times out of 10, everybody's really, really awesome. But the reason we have those policies is because that 1 time out of 10 can be a really terrible thing, and it can have a lot of reverberating negative consequences. You want people to know that you are looking out for them, that just in case something happens, they are not going to have to worry about being questioned, whether or not they were at fault. It's like, no, we're going to take care of you, and here's what you can expect us to do, so you can come into the space feeling safe, knowing that if something happens, you will continue to be safe and we will continue to take care of you. That is, I think, what's really important about these kind of communities. It's the same thing with moderating Facebook spaces or discussion threads. Debate is great, but there is it is important that when you know that there are moderators who will step in and be like, hey, so we're not telling you guys to completely agree, but ad hominem attacks, calling out someone with racist tropes, or threatening them with rape, or saying, hey, I don't see what the big deal is, calm your tits. Not going to fly, because that is going to make things very, it's going to be a chilling effect. If people know that no one is overseeing things like what John did at whatever, it's one of the big features of his blog. I always tell people that if you're going to read something on whatever, you can read the comment threads. It's okay. Because John is there with the mallet, and he actually will moderate things and keep things on track, and that makes for a better community. That makes for more vibrant discussion, because they know that things will not get sidetracked, and that they won't have to worry quite so much about the ambient kind of harm that comes in when people just unthinkingly spout racism or sexism or misogyny or homophobia without being called out.
And hindsight being 2022, I think that it also adds a level of comfort. Not that people think that we find this behavior acceptable, but knowing that we've thought about it proactively and that it's part of our agenda to address issues like that.
Well, I think too that it also takes away the power from the people who are committing these things. And when you know up front that there's a policy, I think you're less likely to go in and, guns blazing, start spouting racist and sexist remarks, etc. So I think it works on that way too. It provides safety for people to speak, and it also puts people on notice that this is not going to have any power here. So take it somewhere else or nowhere at all. And it's really important, I think, that that if we have people who are allies who, especially we'll talk about the rape threats a little bit. If we have a lot of male people in the industry jump in as well as the female people, it lets them know that this isn't right. It's not a cool way for a dude to behave, and we're not going to accept it either. And any type of ally on any situation like that helps a lot. And I've seen it, I get really happy when somebody says something really horrible, which I'm not happy about that, but how many people immediately jump to say, that's not cool, we're not accepting that, you need to go now. That kind of stuff really helps as well. I mean, not necessarily towards me, but people on my Twitter feed or whatever. It really helps to have someone just come in and say, especially if it's in large quantities, then people it takes their power. They don't have it anymore.
I want to give Mary Ann and Scott both 60 seconds.
I just wanted to say that I think one thing that happens when these policy situations come up is that there's often a kind of reaction of shake it off, and often from from women. You'll hear women say, and I've heard women editors, women writers saying oh, just if someone gropes you, punch them in the face. That's what I would do, and so on, right? And so there's I like that we establish a certain minimum standard of decency, and so that not everyone has to be the tough chick in order to survive in the field, right? To basically say this is what we all are agreeing that no one should go this far. And I'm thinking we just unionized at UIC, and so we've had this whole fight about the adjuncts. And it's been, up until now, it's been sort of piecemeal. If you wanted a long-term contract, you could ask, and maybe it would be turned down, maybe you get it. If you wanted a new computer, you could ask, maybe you'll get it, maybe not. And now, I just today read the contract, and everyone gets a new computer once every 4 years, right? It's so it's just you don't have to go and beg, and you don't have to be tough enough to go and talk to your dean and argue for it, right?
Well, and also, it's, you remember the first time you were harassed and you didn't know what to do. And the thing about having a harassment policy is that when it happens to someone the first time at your space, they know what to do. And they know that someone's there and has their back. And that's a huge, huge thing.
Yeah, that shouldn't be your responsibility. Meaning, you shouldn't have to be the tough chick or have to repel that.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things as somebody on the other side of the fence that's so startling is, with Marguerite, for example, who's a young woman, again, that we brought in, and she's working on Batman books. They asked her to write a Lobo series, right? And Lobo, if you don't know Lobo, he's you know Lobo, clearly. And she wrote him crazy, violent, and nutty, and whatever, and then tucking out of school, even though this is being recorded, DC changed the way he looked, and they made him look like a character out of Twilight.
What?
Yeah, and it wasn't her decision, but she was writing the book anyway. And she called me, and I talked to them, and they were like, "I'm sorry, this is the way that they were making him look this way." And what happened was, people thought she had made him look like a hunky guy instead of being, and so she was like, "Oh, I'm getting this hate mail," and I've gotten hate mail, where you're like, "Nah." These people are like, "I hate you, Snyder. You fucking suck." I'm gonna punch you with a con. You're like, "Okay, bring it." Who cares? And then I was like, "Okay, sorry. That sucks. You're getting hate mail." And then she was like, one time I called her. "How are you doing?" And my friend James was like, "You should call her because she's really upset." I called her. She's crying. I'm like, "What's the matter? It's hate mail. Let me say something about it. Don't write hate mail." And then she showed me the hate mail, and it's like, "I know your address. I'm gonna come rape you. I'm gonna find you at a con. It was all that, dozens and dozens of messages like that. And all I would say is that not only obviously is that not okay, but a lot of people, you have to say people are doing that, because I would never know. I would just think hate mail is just some asshole saying, "I hate you, Marguerite, you suck." I would never think that that's what it is. And when you see it, that's when those of us in positions where we have more of a bullhorn or something can say, there is a harassment policy and you guys get out, that's not okay, because none of us assume that that's the way people would behave. I mean, that was really shocking to me. I mean, shocking, depressing, horrifying to see that. But that's the stuff that people deal with, women in the industry I'm learning deal with all the time. But I wouldn't know that, you know what I mean? I would never think that. It would never occur to me that that's what that women writing in the industry put up with on a daily basis, and that's horrifying. So what I'm saying is, it's not your responsibility to be the tough chick or to say, but you should also make it known that you're getting these horrifying things so that people on the other side of the fence see it and can also be allies in whatever capacity is, you know, is reasonable for that.
Can I say something really quick?
Yep, you got 45 seconds.
Also, I think that there's a defensiveness sometimes when policies are implemented in a space that you love, and you say, oh, that doesn't happen here. Are you saying that we're bad guys? I know these people, they're my best friends, they're great. And I think it's important to recognize that your personal experiences are not the totality of the experiences of people in that space.
Yeah.
And just because you haven't heard about something happening doesn't mean it's not happening. And even if it isn't happening, which would be wonderful, that you're just saying, we're gonna make this safe going forward. And then when people come into the community, as has been mentioned, they'll say, you know what, I was anticipated. People are thinking about people like me and they wanna make sure that I'm gonna be okay. And that's a beautiful thing. So it's not necessarily doom and gloom. You can see it with a bit of optimism that we're gonna make this space wonderful. And if there is bad stuff you don't know about, you know, it could get better.
And put yourself in the person's shoes just for a second, right? It doesn't matter how often it happens. If it's happening to you, then you know your perspective on it completely changes. And I actually had a conversation with a friend of mine regarding that. It's like, oh, everyone seems friendly and safe here, and you know, there's not any groping or anything going on like that. And it's like, well, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. And even if it happens once, that's once too many. Question?
My name is Patrick. I'm from an organization called Geeks Out, and we host LGBTQ geek social events.
Tomorrow,
Gail and a few other LGBT creators who shall come. It's at 12:15. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, given the rise of identity-based social groups, how do you make those groups inclusive? So it's not just all the white guys in the LGBT group, and you know, women with one perspective, and colors with one. How do you make them represent things?
I don't know, it's tough. I went to gay square dancing. I'm bi, right? And I went to gay.
There's gay square dancing?
Oh, there is awesome gay square dancing in Chicago. Where you know it's really good, but it's all white men, right? And I went week after week for a couple of months, and then I kind of gave up because it was all white men every week, right? And yeah, it's awesome. You should go look it up. They're really good callers. So we could all invade, right? And then celebrate the gay square dancingness. So I don't have an answer. I'm sorry.
I think for Chicago Nerd Social Club, we ran into a same problem where we had different factions of geekdom, right? We had our D&D geeks, but then we also had our comic book geeks, and it was like, you know, how do we create events that kind of serve the niches, but at the same time bring the community together? And the pattern that we've kind of used is we create these specialized events for the particular fandoms, but then we always have like a unifying event to kind of bring everyone together. And you know, we have lots of like icebreaker questions so that, you know, people from faction A can still talk to faction B.
I think like the best thing we do at CNSC when we do, whenever we do, usually when we do an all-around meetup, we'll do a round called Name Your Nerd Sin in a judgment-free zone. So everybody who's coming, they're like, hey, my name is so-and-so, and I hate Star Wars. Ooh. Like, I'm like, hi, my name is Mitchie Trotta. I love this. I love Lord of the Rings and all this. I don't game.
Yeah, I realized there's a South Asian queer group in Chicago called Tricone, and they also tend to be male-dominated. One of the things they did was they had a sort of breakout session just for women, right? And it was a much smaller group, but the women actually came, right? And they mostly don't to the larger group, right? And so if you do a couple of those, build up some camaraderie, you know, get people thinking of this as their thing, then you can bring that smaller group back to the bigger group. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In the back.
A lot of times, I feel like I'm the most ignored person on earth because I'm mixed, and everyone looks at just white, just black, just Asian, or they look at a mixed race couple. But I'm really, really mixed. I'm 5 different races, and people say, "Oh!" So like, they say I don't count as black because I'm not at least half. I don't count as Asian because I'm not at least half. Well, divide by 5, none of those will equal 50%. So I don't get to have a say in anything apparently. And you know, a lot of people have support for the transgender community, and I'm attracted to transgender people, and LGBT doesn't even talk about people like me. Like, they talk about the people I like, but not me. I feel like there's no hope at this point because everyone else is getting attention except for my demographic.
Well, I mean, sounds totally like a cop-out, but especially because you just got done condemning the internet. But, you know, I find that I meet a lot of people in similar situations, and really it's about finding, a lot of them find their space on the web to connect with those people. And they may not be local, but just finding that there are other people out there that are going through the same problems or the same struggles really, really, like, you know, kind of uplifts them and changes their perspective on things. I actually had a friend move across state to be, you know, more involved in a particular community that he had been communicating with on the web. So that's the one piece of advice that I can give. I know it's not much, but...
Yeah, I want to definitely back that up, that there are, again, the internet is terrible in a lot of ways, but it is definitely a way to be able to find people who can understand you. And I have a peer group that is kind of migrating all to one city, that basically we all know each other on the internet, we see each other once a year, and slowly people will just kind of move to Seattle to be with more people in that group. And there's just kind of a point where, you know, you can find the people that are like you where you can, and then you can get to a point where you can say, this is kind of where I want to go with my life, and I want to be with my community. So the internet is kind of good in the meantime, but you know, you'll find people, and it's doable.
I think it's also looking at, it's not a zero-sum game, which is a lot of the problems when you talk about things like race and gender and who gets a voice and what privilege is. It's not a zero-sum game. You can be privileged in some ways and be marginalized in others. There are many, many intersecting aspects of someone's identity. I mean, I identify primarily as Pacific Islander Asian, but because of my great-grandfather's side, I have mongrel European background. And in a lot of ways, when I was growing up, I would focus very, very much on the fact that I had a European background because it made me feel like I could fit in more with the communities that I was in, which were very, very majorly white. I think it's really important to remember that the pie is infinite. There is enough pie to go around for everybody, whether you identify one way or another, or in multiple ways. You don't have to identify as just one thing. We are all made up of different aspects of our personalities, different aspects of our backgrounds. So when you approach things, I think also as through more of an intersectional viewpoint, looking at ways that your different identity markers and different ways that you view yourself all overlap and how they can tangle and how there are intersecting ways to look at these different things. That also can open up a whole new vocabulary for communicating with other people who you really want to be part of a community. So maybe there's also a different way of looking at it and a different way of expanding your ability to talk about how you feel and how you feel marginalized and left out as well.
Can I just give a couple specific things? The Carl Brandon Society is for people of color in science fiction and fantasy. It's not just for people who are half or whatever, right? People of color, you would definitely qualify. So if you want to look it up, it's got a mailing list. It's a great community. The volume, like sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's busier. I would also say, you know, when I'm 42, right? So when I first came into fandom and writing, there were no other South Asians. I mean, for years I would go to conventions and there were no other South Asians there, right? And I felt very much alone. And in the end, you end up, I mean, I don't know whether you write or draw or anything, like create the art, you know, like write it and then people will find you, right? So, I mean, in some ways, like there's this kind of central question of like, how do people know you're there? And to be able to find this community. So I'm still like, you know, there's not a lot of Sri Lankan Americans in science fiction geekdom 20 years later, right? I mean, it's still not common, but I find commonalities now, right? There's lots of groups that overlap enough for us to be communal. I think the transgender stuff you brought up is really interesting, and I feel like that could be a whole nother topic by itself. But I think there are communities for that as well. I don't know as much about them, but.
I want to get our C2E2
Yeah.
host before. So did you have a question earlier?
Well, I had a question about, do you feel, all of you feel that when you have a more diverse property, does it lead to a diverse, friendlier fandom, or is it the other way around? When you have a big, diverse, friendly fandom clamoring for more diversity, is it more the chicken leading to the egg, or does the egg lead to the chicken?
So I write for Wildcards, which is George R.R. Martin's superhero series, and I will say that definitely feels like it's the creators making the material, which is then bringing in the readers in that case, right? I mean, George specifically kind of came to me and was sort of like, we want to have more people of color writing for Wildcards, right? You know, we want to have more women writing for Wildcards. And it was a very deliberate move, and the character I wrote is a superhero South Asian dancer, right, who, you know, dances and has powers. So, and then that creates readership, right? Like the readers that are interested in that find that, so I don't know. And then you know.
I think as a fan, you know, your appetite for specifics is kind of insatiable, right? So it's like at first it was awesome to have a black superhero, but then it's like, well, why do we have to have a black superhero with this storyline? And then it's going to be, why do we have to have a black superhero with this storyline that?
Why are we only having one?
Right. But you know, so I can imagine, like, you know, as we get more inclusive, people find, you know, even more specific breakdowns that they kind of want to be part of, and that's just from a fan's perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a very chicken and the egg, but it's important to realize that diversity has always been, there have always been diverse fans. N.K. Jemisin wrote this really fantastic speech for Continuum last year where she was talking about the need to acknowledge how diverse geek culture actually has always been. There have always been women who have loved comic books. There have always been gay fans of Doctor Who. There have always been people with different disabilities who love superheroes. So it's important to realize that we're not new. All these people who are not straight, able-bodied, cisgender males in geek culture, we're not new. We've always been here. What may be new is the visibility, because we have things like the internet. We're talking to each other more. We do panels like this. And the more that you acknowledge and kind of stop treating people who don't fit that automatic default as, oh my God, there's an exotic unicorn in my garden. It's like, no, we're here. We've always been here. It's nice that you're finally seeing us, but you know, we're not anything super, super rare, and it would be nice to be acknowledged, to be a part and be contributing to it.
NK is a black woman writer, and she got threatened with gangbang and lynching for writing that speech.
Yeah.
And so I would also say from the fans, it would be really nice if you would demand the diversity.
Yes.
Like that support would be very helpful. So.
The other end too is just getting so diverse where you don't even realize that there's so much diversity. You know, my wife watches Grey's Anatomy and there's a one-legged lesbian dating a Hispanic woman and you don't even blink an eye, you know?
Oh, but that's Shonda Rhimes and she is freaking awesome.
Yeah.
So,
True story.
Yes.
True story. I do watch Scandal.
One of the questions that I had is kind of goes back to this sort of the kind of breakdown of in terms of creating community. The whole idea that on some level you end up with niches, but those can just as easily become ghettos. So like I've observed in the past that you can have organizations that are interested in, you'll have like a black science fiction that will come into existence because the people in that group didn't necessarily feel welcome in the mainstream group. We all kind of know what that tends to mean. But the kind of response from the opposite organization is, well, this group exists, so you should feel welcome to join that group. And we don't need to worry about it anymore because somebody else has kind of picked up the water for that particular question. And so
There's a great set of essays that Salman Rushdie wrote about this. So just if you're interested in exploring this further, Imaginary Homelands is a book of his where he talks about this ghettoization and how, you know, he gets seen as a South Asian writer, and he's like, why can't I just be a writer in English? You know, like, I won the Booker Prize, and then my book won the Booker of Booker Prizes. Like, it is like England's favorite book. Why do I still get talked about as a South Asian writer, right? And I mean, we just have to keep resisting it, right? That ghettoization, I think, and sort of.
And then the other thing I think that pops up too is like, you know, people of privilege then say, well, why can't we have this, you know, / privilege group, right? Like, why can't we have a white science fiction group?
You can.
You have it already.
I know, it's like someone like I know with Batman, everybody I know loves Batman. Women, men, you know, but if you were going to write, but if there was a character from Batman's world who was, say, you know, like someone who was, let's just say, a black lesbian became a title character with her own book, then suddenly it's that book is like, oh, but that book is just for black lesbians. I'm not a black lesbian, so I'm not going to read it. There is that weird, it's like, no, you can. You totally can read it if you love the character, if you love the world. One of the essays in Heinz's project was someone talking, I think it was at Charlotte Ashby. She was saying that one of the things that she would love would be for her white friends to buy their children black Barbies. Don't think that just because, you know, you're not, you know, like, if you buy all the white, you know, white is considered for everybody. Not white is considered for just not white. And that is like, no, it's, you can buy, like, if I can buy a Barbie, if I can buy a blonde Barbie, a white person can buy the Barbie that looks like an Asian girl. And there is nothing wrong with that at all, but we have to push ourselves out of that automatic assumption that, well, this person doesn't look like me, so therefore I'm not interested in it.
And I think another thing that's important is that you need to remember why these spaces are created. That sometimes you can say, oh, well, we have this, you know, general interest group, and then you went off and created the black people's, you know, offshoot of that, and so therefore you must only want to talk to each other. That's not why those spaces exist. They exist to be a safe space and a place where we can bolster each other and kind of signal boost and things like that. And so I think that it's kind of helpful to recognize that, you know, people aren't just off segregating themselves because they're in a marginalized community and they just don't want to talk to you. It kind of serves a different purpose, but that you can still be part of the larger.
I just want to say one thing, because what we're discussing is really important, but at the same time we're breezing over a couple of things that just are ticking me off kind of. We need to stop associating rape with just females, okay? Rape happens to males, rape happens quite often to males, and we need to acknowledge that. If you want to start approaching rape as a societal problem, I think there needs to be more of a broadening of the discussion of who is oppressed. We need to start talking about the intricacies and the nuances between people, and as well as between different social engagements. Probably talk about institutionalized racism a little bit. Let's talk about, you know, rape that happens in jail. Let's talk about these things that kind of get breezed over because we always associate it with a certain gender. Another thing, where's the guy? You're not alone, dude. I'm Arab, Polynesian, and I'm black. You're not alone. I know what I'm saying. You're not alone. And like they said, you have to kind of shoot the beacon in the air and hope people will find you. Because trust me, coming from a situation where both sides of your family kind of look down on dark skin and everybody else is kind of everything else in the spectrum, you're not alone. Trust me. Another thing I wanted to say, when we are sitting in these type of contexts as well, we do have to be welcoming to our counterparts. We have to be welcoming to white cis males. I do get that. But at the same time, it is not our responsibility to coddle them. Okay? I want to make that real clear. For every person in this room that's not a cis white male, it is not your responsibility to coddle them. We have to bring them knowledge, yes. We have to kind of extend an olive branch, yes. But that is not your responsibility. You do not have to do it all the time. And if you feel tired at the end of the day and you want to kick your shoes off, and sometimes you just want to say, fuck you, say it. I mean, you don't have to go into a dissertation on a Facebook post every single time. It's not our responsibility.
Hey, some of us like writing those dissertations.
I'm just saying, it's not our responsibility, and I kind of want to make sure that before anybody else leaves out of this room, we all understand that if you are going to fight for what's right, there's no race that's associated with that, there's no gender associated with that, there's no sexual orientation associated with what's right. Let's just try to be right together.
I just have a quick question for you, and it's got to be like 60 seconds or less. So, how do we address situations though where someone is in a position of privilege and is making a good faith, honest mistake? If we're not taking that step to also educate them, instead we're saying, you know what, I'm tired today, so piss off.
I'm not saying that you don't have to take the steps to do it, but if you find yourself out of every 9 out of 10 times that you log into Facebook, that you find yourself doing that, give yourself a break, take a vacation. There are CEOs who have to deal with boogers and stupid people all day, and guess what they do? Give themselves paid vacation. You feel like you should too.
Yeah.
I mean...
So you're talking more of like the sustained brick wall.
Well, you can opt out of a particular conversation and let your ally. Okay, so yesterday, I was trying to decide what to wear to this panel.
Oh,
okay?
God.
I
am so sorry.
No, it was hilarious. I was like, do I wear a dress or do I wear like a geeky T-shirt, right? Because like here's this, and some guy posts on my Facebook wall in response to this, like this whole like, it doesn't matter what you wear, clothes don't matter, et cetera, right? He kind of completely missed the point. And Michi stepped in, right? And like I was like, oh, thank God, I don't have to respond to him. Like I'm just I'll see how she does in the morning. I'll check back in.
I was paying that forward because there was another conversation I was seeing that another friend was involved in where I was like, I just can't today. I can't deal with this. So unfortunately, this guy gets, I'm like, oh nope, I'm done. I can't, and I don't have to be, and I'm not always nice about it. I'm perfectly upfront with the fact that depending on how I feel.
You were a little harsher than I would have been.
Yeah, and that's okay because everybody has different voices. Some people are always going and I'm going to say for me, I grew up in an environment where it was very important to be polite, very important, and a very hard thing for me to learn growing up. And I think this is hard for everybody because we come from a society that very values politeness and niceness. Polite and nice does not always equal kind and good. It's very important to make that separation because a lot of terrible things are done very politely. People can say the worst possible things to you in the nicest tone. So it's important for, that's why we need a variety of voices. There are always going to be the people that have more time and energy, possibly because they have the shield of privilege, possibly because they're just pissed off and they have something to say today, who will have the sustained conversations, and that there are some people who feel and can be more effective when they are short, when they are blunt, when they are honest, because, sorry.
I just want to take one more question.
Karlyn's been waiting to talk. I want to say that everything you said about rape, very, very important points, and that something that I want to make clear is that we've been talking about it a lot on this panel, and that's really in the context of rape as it is weaponized as a tool to shut up women on the internet.
Yeah.
It's a very specific thing.
Very important.
It does not take into the complexities of things that happen. Yeah. It is very much a trump card that is used by people to say, you are a woman, you ostensibly have a vagina, I'm going to rape it, shut up, I win. That is exactly what we're talking about with rape. And it's a specific way that it is used on the internet in these anonymous spaces. And
it's not just on the internet, too. Yeah, I've had people say that to my face before.
Exactly. So I want to say that, you're absolutely, everything you're saying is right.
Attacking rape as a societal problem. Period. I'm approaching it not just from the internet, I'm thinking about it.
Right.
When you hear jokes when guys say it to another guy, they're going to rape each other, as in, I'm going to demean you, I'm going to take your power away from you. I mean, it applies in so many different ways. And I know I talked for a long time, but the last thing I want to say was about allies. As being an ally, yes, having allies is important, but at the same time, having an ally like you two together, that's important as well, extraordinarily important. I mean, we can have allies who are white cis men, but we should not look to them constantly for shields. Let's look to each other for shields, and possibly provide a shield for them if they need, Let's start subverting things.
I got to move on. This guy's been waiting patiently, and then we got to get out of here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
About being part of the community. So in the social justice world, we kind of you messed up, go away forever. You can never fix it. I'm not going to be part of that anymore. And we've talked about sort of how you can maybe remain part of a community that made a mistake or was toxic, and making that decision for yourself to work from the inside to make it better, or listen better, or moving off. And I want to have a everybody about how you negotiate that, about staying part of something that isn't perfect, or do you separate and sort of form your own community?
Everything is problematic. That's what it boils down to, is that everything is problematic and everybody gets to have their own metrics about where they draw the line about what is okay for them to tolerate and what they can't deal with anymore. So it's really important, I think, that everybody is okay with it. Like if Marianne is more patient and I'm like, I'm done, I'm leaving, I can't deal with this anymore, that she doesn't do the whole like, hey, thank you so much.
Bye,
We'll
Scott.
see, we'll pop by your table tomorrow. So it's very important to say that, like, oh, well, I'm sorry you feel that way and you're leaving, but don't make them feel bad that they can't do it anymore. Don't make them feel guilty or that they're weak or that they're failing by not constantly staying there and fighting the good fight. If someone has to leave, they're doing it they've probably taken more than anyone has actually seen in public. So by the time they're leaving, that's it. That's the last straw. So
I would also
yeah.
say, like, even if you love a community, you can also protect yourself,
Yes.
right? And sort of, like, there's only so much time I can spend with my relatives, right? Like, you know, like, I'm not going to cut them off. I will keep going. I will keep visiting. I will be there for the holidays. But I'm going to think about how many days I can take, right? And plan accordingly.
Yeah, and I think it's also something that's really hard is that sometimes people say, oh, I see you and I know that you are in a space that is problematic. What are you doing to fix it? Why haven't you fixed this problem? There's, it's something to wrestle with because there's a question of how complicit am I in this by remaining if I'm not actively tearing it down? And it's I don't really have a good answer for this. It's something I grapple with a lot of, having to balance taking care of yourself and making it so that you can continue to be in the spaces that you love, but also wanting to change them. I don't
have support systems. Let yourself, have people that you can go to where you can break down and just let it out. You don't have to be the strong person. Have those trusted people you can go to. So at least if you have some kind of valve where you can go off and just be like, that's why safe spaces for people of color or for be able to talk to other women. When you're talking to people who understand what you're going through, it can make a huge difference.
All right.
Yeah.
It's almost
Good?
8. Should we wrap up?
Yeah.
Thank you all for staying.
Thanks for letting us stay extra.